All right, so this is part 3. We're beginning at the stomach, letter C of your outline. Let's take a look at the stomach's anatomy. So we have two curvatures. We have a greater curvature, which is the bottom curve of the stomach. We have a lesser curvature, which is this curve here. We have a cardia region, fundus, body, and pylorus, right? So these are the regions of the stomach. So the cardia is just right here, right by the junction of the esophagus. So if you read it, it's within 3 centimeters of the gastroesophageal junction. Gastro refers to stomach, esophageal refers to the esophagus. So gastroesophageal junction means when they come together. The fundus is the region superior to the junction. So if you just drew a line that goes across from the junction, everything that goes above that is called the fundus. The majority of your stomach is going to be the body. The body is the largest region. And then the pylorus is going to be a little bit of a narrowing canal, right? So sometimes it's called a pyloric canal. And so it's going to be this sort of last portion of the stomach as the food is moved into the duodenum, or the very first part of our small intestine. Okay, so the pylorus, if you watch the gastric antrum squeezing, you were watching this portion right here. So let's talk about the this. Why don't we look at the sphincter since we're here? So there is another thickening of the stomach here to create a circular muscle valve or sphincter. That's called the pyloric sphincter. So the pyloric sphincter will close after the food. Okay, so after the food has been digested with gastric juice, it's called chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. And so the chyme will move into the small intestine here through the pyloric sphincter. And the pyloric sphincter will control that release and also not really allow things to come back, right? If we look at the 3 smooth muscle layers, so the stomach, there's an exception to the rule here. The stomach actually has 3 layers of smooth muscle of its muscularis externa. So remember we talked about how the muscularis externa, there's an inner circular and there's an outer longitudinal muscle. But with the stomach, there's a 3rd added muscle called oblique. So the oblique layer is the innermost layer, and you can see that oblique runs at an angle. Here's our circular layer. Our longitudinal layer is going to run along the long axis of the stomach. So it's going to sort of be like run like this, right? So here we can see the longitudinal. It's going to run along the long axis. The reason why the stomach has 3 muscles is because the stomach's job is to churn the food and mix it very well with the chyme. Mix it very well with the gastric juice to create chyme. And so we have to have a 3rd direction of squeezing in order to get a mixing sort of action going. So that's our 3rd smooth muscle, okay, for churning. Inside, if you look inside the stomach, you have these folds called rugae, and rugae they're extra tissue because you know that your stomach changes shape, right? After you eat like a really big meal, like Thanksgiving dinner, you know the stomach can very well expand to accommodate all that food. So this rugae is extra tissue, kind of like a pleated skirt. So you can have room for expansion because the stomach does have to expand a lot if you're eating a lot. So let's take a look at that. So number 2, the internal anatomy is rugae. Let's look at, this is shark rugae. So this is a shark stomach showing those, the extra folds of mucosa there. And then this is a little bit of a close-up. So here is where we can see the columnar epithelium. So you can see how the epithelium is drawn in little columnar cells, and they have gastric pits. So your stomach is pitted. It's got holes all over the place. So if you're walking along the stomach, right, you're going to fall into a hole because there are all these pits. You're walking along, there's another hole. These are called gastric pits, and the gastric pits are going to lead to a specialized region called gastric glands, okay? So the difference between a pit and a gland, let me see if I have another picture here, yeah. So the difference between a pit and a gland is that the pit is just undifferentiated cells. They're just lining cells. They don't really do anything. They form the pit. But the gland, now these cells are specialized to make gastric juice. So gastric juice is made in your gastric glands. There are specialized cells. They have different names. I'm not going to have you guys learn those here, but they all produce something different, and they're going to create gastric juice and come up, and then the gastric juice will come through the gastric pit and then enter into the lumen of the stomach. Okay, so gastric juice, I want you to know what's in it. You don't have to match the cells that do it, but the gastric juice contains hydrochloric acid, and the hydrochloric acid is required to convert an enzyme. Pepsinogen is the inactive form of the enzyme to pepsin, which is the active form of the enzyme. So the enzyme doesn't get activated unless there's a very acidic environment, which is the stomach's also supplying that acidic environment. Pepsin only digests protein. So the only food group your stomach enzymatically digests is protein. The other food groups, lipids and carbohydrates and nucleic acids, those get digested partially by the low acid. The bonds between those molecules can break down because of the acid environment, but enzymatically the only thing your stomach digests is protein. Okay, so gastric juice also contains a lot of mucus, all right, and that is because we are going to protect the lining of our stomach with this mucus, and if the mucus goes away, the lining of your stomach is exposed, and the acids that are created can really irritate that exposed area, which is an ulcer. So if you look at Roman numeral 3 in your gastric juice outline, stomach ulcers, the portion of the stomach lining is destroyed, protective mucus layer is compromised, and acids produced can cause irritation and pain to the area. An ulcer is basically an open sore in your stomach. And the open sore, a lot of people think that your stomach acids create the open sore. That's not the predominant way you get stomach ulcers. Most stomach ulcers are actually caused by a bacterial infection. The bacteria erodes the lining of your stomach, and then that's what gives you the ulcers, because the lining of the stomach has been eroded by the immune reaction of that bacteria to the bacteria. All right, so what are the functions of the stomach? The stomach is to store your food. It's to mix the food with the digestive enzymes and acids and create chyme, right? And then move that chyme into the small intestine. So chyme is kind of like a soup. I think we've all thrown up in our lives, and so that's basically chyme. So let's look at the small intestine. So I'm not going to have you guys have, the stomach is not part of your histology, so don't worry about the stomach. This is the lining of your stomach, right? Really cool scanning electron micrograph. So you can see that if you're walking along, pit, there's a pit, there's a pit, there's a pit. Lots of pits, gastric pits. All right, so let's look at our small intestine. So it's small due to the diameter. So if you look at the diameter of the large intestine and the diameter of the small intestine, that's why we're using the word small. It's actually much, much longer than your large intestine is. The three regions you want to know is the duodenum. So this very first blue part, that's the duodenum. The stomach is going to put the chyme into this duodenum, and then the duodenum does a circle around the pancreas. So the pancreas actually sits in this space that you don't see it. And then the duodenum becomes the jejunum. The jejunum then becomes the ileum, and then the ileum will take all of that undigested waste and put it into the first portion of the large intestine. So if you look at the small intestine from the outside, you can't really tell what's going, like the duodenum, how, you can't see the difference between the three parts, the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, but you can internally. So internally, it's a little bit different, and I'm not going to have you guys learn the specific differences, but just know that histologically and morphologically on the inside, it is different. You'll see that the duodenum, there's lots of glands here. Those are absent here. You can see those malt appear in the ileum, which are not present in the other parts. So you could tell a difference, but we're not learning that specifically for this right here. You have a lot to learn just without that. So the small intestine is, the whole function of the small intestine, why it's so long, is to increase how long you have in contact with the food that you just digested and to extract as many nutrients and as many calories as you can from the food. So in order to do that, if you look at number 3, the internal anatomy of the small intestine, there are 3 features that really increase the surface area for contact with food. So letter A is the plica. So remember that word plica is plural. That hill, upward hill-like projection, that's plica. Then we have the villi, right? We have these finger-like projections. Remember I said that they look like flames. And then we have microvilli. So the microvilli are not pictured here. Oh, sorry. They are pictured here. All right, so this is one villus, and then we have tiny cells, these columnar cells with tiny microvilli. So those 3 features are going to increase surface area for absorbing nutrients and calories. If you look at Roman numeral B, where I say villi, there is the lacteal. So this might look familiar to you because you learned about the lacteal in the lymphatic system. So there's this green lymphatic capillary inside every villus. So a lot of them. That lacteal from the lymphatic system absorbs lipids. So interesting that the blood capillary network receives your carbohydrates and your nucleic acid and your proteins, but it's the lacteal that receives your lipids when you absorb your food nutrients, okay? So remember that the lacteal is in every one of your villi. All right, so coming back here, we can see, this is just the cartoon again, your mucosa, your submucosa, your muscularis externa, and your serosa. And this is just a nice picture of sort of the plica, how you have that upward projection of the submucosa and mucosa, and then the villi are these finger-like projections. So if you were to look at a small intestine, the villi would make it very carpeted, like it would be soft and like velvet because those tiny villi are visible almost enough where you can kind of have a soft texture, okay? And then this is the intestine. So what you are looking at, these upward flaps, right? Those are the plica. And if you were to touch it, it would be a little bit soft because of the villi. All right, here's another picture, a histology slide of the small intestine. This is difficult because it's zoomed in a lot. You can only see the villi here, so the villi, and you can see the transition from mucosa to submucosa, hopefully, right? And then see this pink band going across, that's your muscularis mucosa, that smooth muscle, which looks like this. This is the first part of your muscularis externa. This is just a close-up of the villus itself. So there are goblet cells interspersed because mucous membrane, the word mucus is there for a reason. We are making mucus all along the way. Your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. So goblet cells are important to recognize here. And we have the brush border, or we have the microvilli on the edges. All right, so moving into the large intestine. The large intestine, so here we have the ileum, right? The ileum is going to connect with this first portion of the large intestine called the cecum. This is going to be located on the lower right-hand quadrant of your peritoneal cavity, right? It's on the right. And then here, there's a dead end. So it's, you're not going anywhere else. This is the dead end. There is an appendix attached to the cecum. So one word on the appendix. The appendix has lymphatic tissue in it. We talked about this a little bit with the lymphatic system, but right now people think that it might be a vestigial structure, so it had a more robust function in the past. There are some hypotheses out there about its tentative function now. Maybe it's a storage area for bacteria, the good bacteria that colonizes your intestines, and then if you ever have an intestinal upset like diarrhea or food poisoning, that the good bacteria can from here repopulate your intestines. But the appendix here, it is hollow, so there is an opening into the appendix, and so this liquid waste that's coming into your cecum, you can imagine that can easily impact the appendix and then cause an infection, which is called appendicitis. and then this can get swollen, and the walls of this can rupture, and that's called a burst appendix. And if that happens, you have a big mess on your hand because you have a lot of waste coming into the peritoneal cavity. So be careful if you have a lot of acute pain in this lower right-hand side of your abdomen and you have a fever, that go to the hospital. Okay, so we have our cecum. We have a valve here, okay, called the ileocecal valve that's going to prevent backflow. All right, that's what valves do, right? So once the waste comes in, it does not go back into the ileum. There's an ileocecal valve. The waste will travel up the ascending colon. There is a flexure here, so there's a bend, right? So this is called the right colic flexure. Another word for it is hepatic flexure. I kind of like hepatic flexure because it tells you that the liver is right there. As we move along, this is called the transverse colon, transversing your abdominal cavity. We have another flexure, this is called the left colic flexure or splenic flexure, because your spleen is located right here. Then you have the descending colon on the left side. You're going to have a curved region called the sigmoid colon, and then the rectum is again straight up and down. So remember, rectus means straight. So like the rectus abdominis, your rectus femoris, those muscles are straight up and down on your body. So the rectum is straight up and down. So let's take a look at the outline here. Let's talk about the haustrum or haustra. So this is a feature of large intestine only. If you looked at small intestine and large intestine side by side, large intestine has these little puckered units, these little square units, and those are called the haustra. Okay. The haustra are formed because there's a muscle on the outside. So you see this thin muscle. This is called the taenia coli. Taenia is an old word for worm. Coli is a word referring to the colon. So someone thought this looked like the worm of the colon. And what it is this, it's your outer longitudinal muscle that has been sort of miniaturized into this strip that you can see on the outside. So the taenia coli is the outer longitudinal modified. And that's what actually puckers the large intestine into those units called haustra. Okay. Internally, we have the ileocecal valve. We have a simple columnar epithelium, many goblet cells. So let's take a look at, so here's your ileocecal valve, right? There it is. Here's your appendix. Not too pretty. And then this is a nice radiograph. So you can see the beginning of the cecum. You come up, the ascending colon, this nice curve. This is your hepatic flexure, transverse colon, splenic flexure, descending colon. Look at the sigmoid, much more dramatic than we had in that diagram, right? Sigmoid colon, and then here's our rectum. And then this is really good because you really see those haustra, how unique the large intestine is here. I wanted to come here and show you the picture of our large intestine histology. So the large intestine, goblet cells become very important because the job of the large intestine is to dehydrate the waste. And in order to move something that's dehydrated, right, you need some kind of lubricant. So mucus becomes significant to lubricate the dehydrated waste. And so it has a sort of, a better way out. Everybody know how to put that, but a smoother way out. Let's see. So many goblet cells in crypts. So the word intestinal crypt here is just the groove that you find in the mucosa. So there's like, they're not pits, okay, like the gastric pit, but they're called crypts. But it's the same. They're not specialized in any way. It's just the mucosa coming inward and forming these kind of crevices or crypts. You are going to have a lot of lymphoid nodules or malt in this area. And there's nothing to increase surface area, right? There's no plica, there's no villi, there's no microvilli, because we're done increasing surface area. That's the job of the small intestine. We're done absorbing nutrients. We're just taking in water. And the last thing to notice here is this specialized outer longitudinal layer that's now called the taenia coli. So this is a histology slide of large intestine. So you're going to want to be able to tell a difference between large intestine and small intestine. So large intestine, again, a lot of goblet cells. Every single white little cell here is a goblet cell. So you can see there the majority of the cell is goblet. The crypts are the grooves, the deeper grooves here. You see the word crypt is there. Then we have, this is really blown up. So it's the muscularis mucosa looks bigger. Just beginning to look at the submucosa there. All right, so small versus large intestine. This should be fairly obvious to you, right? This is small intestine. Why? Because I see a very large plica and I see villi, right? This is large intestine. Why? I don't see plica. I don't see villi. And I see so many goblet cells, right? And the edge of it is pretty flat. So nothing to increase surface area, many, many goblet cells. All right, so let's go back. Before we talk about colonoscopy, let's go back and look at this picture one more time and finish it up. So if you're looking at number 4, the rectum under large intestine, so the rectum is going to be 7 to 8 inches, the last part of your large intestine. At the very end here, there's going to be the anal canal. And the anal canal will have 2 sphincters. There's an internal sphincter, which is smooth muscle, and an external sphincter, which is skeletal muscle. So when you're holding it in, right, you have to go to the bathroom and you're squeezing your anus because you really need to go to the bathroom. There's no better way to put it. You're squeezing the external skeletal muscle because that's a voluntary muscle, right? That's what you learn when you're being potty trained. When you're little, right, you learn to squeeze that external sphincter. The internal sphincter is a separate sphincter. It's smooth muscle, okay? So this orientation of internal is smooth, external is skeletal is the same as we have our urinary sphincter. So whether you're going to urinate or to defecate, you have one sphincter that is under autonomic control, the smooth muscle, and another sphincter that is under voluntary control, the external sphincter. All right, so I think that's it, right? So let's talk about colonoscopy. Yeah, let's talk about colonoscopy now. So the health of one's colon becomes an issue the older you get. Again, because this is where you hold a lot of the undigested waste and colon cancers. And we're living long enough and we have diets now that sort of leave us to be a little bit more prone to have colon cancer. It's actually a very common kind of cancer in America, in the United States. And so to check the health of the colon, you do a colonoscopy. And this is where they send a camera, right? So they have to go through your rectum, and they're going to send a camera and they look at the wall of your large intestine to look for abnormalities such as a polyp. So you can see this outgrowth of the mucosa here. This is a polyp. Polyps can be benign, but they can also be cancerous. So polyps are usually taken out and for a biopsy if they find one. So you can see a normal colon and one with a polyp. And one thing I want to mention here, just because if you have colon cancer in the family, you start getting colonoscopies earlier on. And if you do not, you still need to get them later in life, but later on, I think normal colonoscopies start around 50. If you're younger, if you have colon cancer in the family, I think they start you around 40 with colonoscopies. Anyhow, but it's no fun. My husband has to get them because he has colon cancer in his family. And in order to get a nice clean shot of the colon like this, you have to fast and take a laxative drink. And it basically cleans you out 24 hours beforehand. But it's an extremely sort of uncomfortable undertaking to get a nice full colonoscopy like this. I will show, again, this link. It's just a quick, I think, 5-minute video of a camera moving through the digestive tract. So you guys can pause the video now, and I suggest watching this. Or watching it at the end. We can do that too after we talk about the accessory organs. But I'm going to stop part 4 right here.